Testament manuscripts, and then part 2 we're going to look at the New Testament manuscripts. But I want to start off with showing you a little movie clip to kind of like set the scene here of what we're going to be talking about. And you may have not seen this movie, but you know who Tom Hanks is, and he's in this scene. So let's go ahead and watch a movie you may have never seen the clip from, but let's watch it anyways. Okay, here we go. Somebody turn up the volume. So I apologize.
But I was practicing listening.
Yeah, it was. So in the scene, if you had a hard time hearing, the scene is Professor Dorr, played by Tom Hanks in the movie Lady Killers. He has this PhD, the Lady Killers. Yes, the Lady Killers. It's based on an older movie. He has a PhD in ancient literature, and he's reading all the time. The lady he's staying with, because he's trying to use her to make a robbery. Anyways, talks about all these books of antiquity, mostly in Latin. If you heard him say these things of the dead tongue, they still hold much weight for me. He's talking about the wisdom, accumulated wisdom of man. And that's when the lady says, "What the wisdom of man? What about the wisdom of the Lord?" And he goes, "Oh yes, the good book. I have found much reward in its pages." But he says, if you didn't hear it, he goes on to talk, there are other good books. So I bring this clip up because in many ways this is sort of a common view of the Bible. It is a book, it is a good book, but there are equally other good books out there that hold just as much wisdom and reward as the Bible. Now again, he's not a real character, but he represents a real common view that a lot of people have. That, the Bible, maybe it's filled with myths and fables, but, there's some good advice in there. Yeah, like, I think it's probably a pretty good idea not to kill people. Yeah. Or, that lying thing, I don't think we should do that either. So, and again, like we've been talking about, it's not just a book. It's not just a good book. And hopefully over these next 2 sessions, when we talk about the manuscripts of the Bible, we'll see not only the quantity that we have, but the quality, how they were preserved, how they were protected. Really, no other ancient book compares to the Bible. So hopefully we walk away with knowing it's not just a good book. So last session we started learning that the Bible was not written originally in English, but it was written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and what was the last one? Greek, yeah. And how incredible it was for God to use a language like Greek, the universal language of his time, to communicate his word. And again, unlike Professor Dorr's good books in Latin, the biblical languages are not dead. And we learned about the 8 different types of writing materials. We have this awesome, cool reed pen that works. See, they did it. Yeah, it's possible. Kate, thank you for showing this to us and making us believers in this. Technology. This is, again, technology, guys. Okay. So when we talk about the biblical manuscripts, there are some caveats I need to get out of the way. So sometimes you'll see, I'll get that later, or someone can grab that. Sometimes you'll read about biblical manuscripts. Thank you so much. And they'll say a biblical manuscripts and then they'll abbreviate this word. MS, MSS. So if you see this, I just want you to know, if you're looking at and you want to further explore the Bible and you just see these abbreviations, the MS is just referring to a single manuscript. MSS talking about multitudes of them, okay? So a manuscript is any handwritten document, okay? So that means any ancient manuscripts, all works of antiquity, okay, that were written by hand, they would be classified as a manuscripts. Now when we talk about the Bible itself, we would just say biblical manuscripts. Just a second, I'll get to you. Yeah, hold on. So the pages you find in your English Bible are based on handwritten documents and letters. I say handwritten again because before the invention of the printing press, everything was written by hand or copied by hand. Now, there are two types of manuscripts, okay? You either had scrolls or codex. Codex, the plural being codices, okay? Scrolls or codex or codices, okay? Now, the average papyrus scroll, because scrolls are mainly made from papyrus, if you rolled one out, the average length would be 30 feet long. Okay, that's pretty long. 9 to 10 inches high. And when it comes to the Old Testament, what they would have to do is basically only one book in the Old Testament would fit per scroll. So you imagine trying to carry around the entire Old Testament in scroll form. You had to be pretty tough or had some help. So yeah, one book per scroll. And again, you rolled it out. And so you can obviously see the disadvantages of scrolls back then. But back then, that was like really cool technology. Scroll. Hey man, check out the scroll. And again, only carried one book. But it was awkward to carry only one book per scroll. Codex, on the other hand, made it possible to carry all the books of the Old Testament or New Testament. A codex basically is really what we call a book today. It's the first form of books, a codex. So in many ways, historians and scholars credit early Christians for the popularity and the reason we have books. They're the ones that popularized that form of technology to carrying and transmitting information. Okay? So codex was the other type of manuscript we have. So when we talk about ancient manuscripts, like biblical manuscripts, again, two types, scrolls and codices, which brings up an interesting question. How many of these things do we have? Okay. How many biblical manuscripts do we have in existence? How many have scientists, archaeologists, historians, and other people? How many so far? Because they keep finding stuff. But how many do we have so far? I'm going to use a real technical term here. I hope it doesn't bother anyone, but this is the way I would describe it when it comes to biblical manuscripts. We have a lot. That wasn't as funny as I thought it was going to go off. Okay. We have a lot, okay? We have a lot of biblical manuscripts located from Egypt to Europe to the Middle East. And with the New Testament, we actually have more biblical manuscripts on the New Testament. In fact, we have a total of New Testament manuscripts in Greek. Just in Greek, we have 5,800 we have 5,800 copies, manuscripts, handwritten copies of the New Testament, the complete New Testament in just Greek, 5,800. Then we have another 10,000 of the New Testament in Latin, came from the Middle Ages. And then we have another 9,300 New Testament manuscripts from other languages. So that's about 10. If you add that up, we have a little over 25,000 copies. We have manuscripts of the New Testament. 25,000. Again.
In other words, there's a lot of people devoting their lives to just writing the New Testament out.
Yeah, it's very popular, very, very important document, right? Yeah, absolutely. Now, that's pretty huge. But again, and I would say we're going to see this in a minute, no other ancient document or manuscript even comes close to that. Okay? Now, the Old Testament, as far as that's concerned, we have about 2,000. We have 2,000 manuscripts of the Old Testament, which if you think about it, that's pretty incredible. Okay? Think about 4,000 years of history, all that time. Take into account the historical volatility of everything that was going on in the nation of Israel, the receiver and guardians of the Old Testament text. Think about the writing materials they use. Think about the climate, the conditions of the climate. And I think 2,000 Old Testament manuscripts is amazing, okay? So 2,000. So 25,000 plus New Testament manuscripts, 2,000 Old Testament manuscripts. Now, I haven't spoken of the number of Old Testament manuscripts we have. Who knows? We may discover more. But one of the things you need to realize, if you discuss, if you're like, okay, and I actually did this one time when I was first studying, I was like, how come we got 25,000 New Testament manuscripts? And I know it's older, but we only got 2,000. And if you ever go talk to an Old Testament scholar who specializes in Old Testament textual criticism or Hebrew, or you talk to a Jewish scholar and you're like, what's up? Why do we only have 2,000? And they would say, it's really irrelevant. And you say, why is that? Unlike the New Testament, knowing and counting the number of Old Testament manuscripts we have, they would say it's irrelevant. Why? Because you need to realize that ever since the first book of the Old Testament was originally written, the text of the Old Testament was copied and circulated, and that process of copying was so meticulous out of reverence for God's Word that they are very comfortable saying, look, if it really gets down to it, all we really need is one. That's what they would say. They was so well preserved and so well copied that despite some difference in versions and number of manuscripts, that they pretty much all match. That even if you just had one received text, that would be good enough. It's just that meticulously copied, carefully preserved. They could say you could take 2,000, and if 1,999 got burned up in a fire and we just had one left, you know what? That would be okay. We could feel confident, absolutely confident, that it was preserved the way it was written. Okay? And as we'll see here in a minute when we talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, that really backs up that claim. Okay? So let's talk about some of the Old Testament manuscripts, okay, that you need to be aware of. And I'm just going to throw some things up here and we'll talk about them. Old Testament manuscripts worth mentioning. The first is the Masoretic text. Okay? The Masoretic text. Okay? This is a name we give to a group of manuscripts prepared by a particular group of Jewish scholars known as the Masoretes. Okay? And did you guys get that glossary?
We did on GroupMe, but I'm not sure how to view it.
PDF. All right, let's talk after this class. Okay, so there's more information there if you want to know. So we have the Masoretic text. These were a bunch of scholars, Jewish scholars, who wanted to do two things, okay? Number one, they wanted to preserve God's Word in the Old Testament, and not only the writing, but also, here goes back to where you're going at, they wanted to preserve the correct vocalization of the words, okay? So, how the words would be written out loud, because to them, when they had the public reading of God's Word, it was really important that it was read correctly and it was read well. There's a case for that too, still today, by the way, a little side note. And so the original Hebrew, as you notice, did not have vowels. And when the Jews mainly spoke Aramaic, they lost their ability before the time of Christ to correctly pronunciate and read Hebrew. So the Masoretics, these guys around 400 to 1000 AD, they developed a vowel pointing system where out of respect for the original words, you have these little points and dots above and below and beside the characters. So if you can see this, you see here, you see this? See these markings above and below? These are the Masoretic systems to help people to correctly pronounce God's Word in the Old Testament. So they developed this system to help people to pronunciate. Remember, Aramaic Use the same letters, okay? People spoke Aramaic. So they're like, okay, we got to help our people because they've lost their grasp of the Hebrew language that the Old Testament was written in. So the Masoretics came up with this system, okay? I know it looks like chicken scratch, okay? But again, they wrote above and below, so they did not disturb the original words, okay? But to aid the reader, to help them in the reading of God's word, especially in public worship. Now, one of the oldest Masoretic texts we have is the Cairo Codex. Okay. The Cairo Codex, 895 AD, which is a copy of the former prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, and the later prophets. Then you have the Aleppo Codex. This is the Aleppo Codex, okay? Copied the first part in the 10th century AD. This manuscript is the complete Old Testament. It was thought originally to have been destroyed by an anti-Jewish riot in Syria, okay, Aleppo, Syria, but they found out it survived and it can be seen in Jerusalem today, okay? By the way, a lot of these Old Testament manuscripts get their names from where they are housed.
Super good question. You might already cover this, but I know it's right to left. Is it still top to bottom, or is it bottom to top?
Right to left, top to bottom?
It is top to bottom?
No, you go across. You go across.
Oh, across the page.
Yeah, you go across. Yeah. Okay, yeah, you're going across. Yeah.
Across like both
So
pages
you go
or just
across,
one page?
down, and then
You
across.
okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. Let me use this. Okay. You go here, here, here. Okay? Okay. 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 All right. Good question.
So you still read the full book?
I'm going to start here reading. Then I'm going to move over here.
Oh, that's so weird. Okay.
Okay?
That's why I wanted to ask that.
Yes. All the way down. Next column. Actually, over here and then here. Sorry. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Ask him after class.
I'm so confused. Are you starting, like, I'm starting?
Okay, we'll look at it.
Start at the very left column.
The right.
Start with that column and then go to that column.
So if you okay, wait. You guys are confusing me. If you open up the Hebrew text, the BHS, Biblical Hebraica Stuttgartensia, whatever, because that's from the German Bible Society. That's where if you want to get a copy of the Hebrew text, which is based on the next manuscript we're going to be talking about here. So you know how you go like this? You want to read, right? You go like this. Oh, that's how you do it. And you start here.
Like Japanese.
Yeah, kind of like ancient languages. Okay,
So the story on this page would start from the top right.
start there, in here.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
So much simpler.
Clarify that. Let's talk about the one of the big Masoretic texts that we need to mention. That is the Leningrad Codex. Again, name for where it's housed.
What is it?
Leningrad, as in Leningrad, Russia. Okay. Now, yeah, you're like, what? We got Bible stuff in Russia. Okay. Dated 916, started AD to 1008 AD when it was completed. It is a complete copy of the Hebrew Old Testament. It is considered the most oldest and most accurate complete copy of the Old Testament in manuscript that we thought to have. It is the principal manuscript used in the Old Testament. So if you were to study Hebrew and you picked up a copy of BHS, Biblical Hebraica Stuttgartensia, and it's in a little, if you got it digitally or whatever, okay, the main text that is used is based on the Leningrad Codex. Again, the oldest and most complete, accurate Old Testament manuscript we have, okay? So it's a big one. Now, if you didn't notice, some of the most significant things in the manuscript we have in the Old Testament, again, a lot of these in the Masoretic text were written 1,000 to 2,000 years after the originals were recorded. And for a while, this was a problem. A lot of people use this as a source of criticism for the Bible and its reliability of the Old Testament text until...
They found the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes, thank you for that dramatic entrance. Yes, until they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I want to talk about a couple other manuscripts. The Nash Papyrus. This is a fragment. Pieces are fragments of the papyrus scroll from the Old Testament, which was believed to be, at the time, the earliest dated manuscript of the Old Testament, dated 150 BC. Again, before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Thank you. Then you have the Cairo Geniza fragments. You had Hebrew and Aramaic fragments of scrolls. There are like over 200,000 fragments we have as part of this collection. It was discovered in an old synagogue in Cairo, Egypt. And they found it in a storage room that was walled off, maybe to protect this. So that's where they found it. Then you have the Samaritan Pentateuch. Okay, the Samaritan Pentateuch. What was the distinction between the Jews and the Samaritans? What was the difference when they thought of the Old Testament? What?
Never mind.
What were you going to say?
Well, you said so the way they thought of the Old Testament.
Yeah, what was the difference? Does anybody know? Okay, let's talk about their view of the Old Testament.
One is God's chosen people and one is not included.
Okay, they only recognize the book of the law, the first 5 books,
Who's they?
the Samaritans. So next time you like run into that, think about that and the encounter that Jesus has. Okay, anyways, so the Samaritan Pentateuch is only the first 5 books of the Old Testament, again, because they only believed in the first 5 books when they had broken off from the Jews. It's taken from a Samaritan community. Interestingly enough, it differs slightly from the Masoretic text, but it preserves the ancient and important readings we have. Then we have the Targums, and this is in your glossary I give you. It's just Aramaic Targums, or just simply Targums. This is Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, but basically this is paraphrasing. So again, because the Jews didn't understand Hebrew, when they would have the reading and explanation of the Hebrew Old Testament, they would have to do paraphrases in Aramaic. And then eventually they wrote this down, these paraphrasings. Okay, so that's how we have the Aramaic Targums. Then we have the Syriac Peshitta. Be careful how you say that too many times, the Peshitta. It's just a copy of the Old Testament and New Testament in Syriac. And then we have lots and lots of Latin texts that were translations of the Greek Septuagint. So Latin texts. Then we have this thing often just referred to by LXX, which is, what is LXX? Roman numeral for what? 70, yeah. So this is one of the oldest manuscripts of the Old Testament, and there's lots of different versions. As we talk about the Apocrypha, I'm going to mention why this is important to know that there are different versions of the Septuagint. But basically, it's a Greek translation of the Old Testament from Hebrew, done by, and the reason why it's abbreviated 70 is because it was done by the work of 70 to 72 different Jewish scholars in Alexandria. Alexandria is where? Egypt. Okay? So they're doing it for the Alexandrian community of the Jews there who spoke Greek, not Hebrew. So they put the Old Testament in Greek for the Jewish community who didn't know Hebrew in Alexandria, Virginia. There's a place like that too as well. Okay, so I think that's amazing. See, because what we see over and over again is God's word being translated so it's understood by his people. This is the 3rd century BC work. Was the standard Old Testament text for Jesus and his followers. This was. And in the New Testament, when they would quote from the Old Testament, most often where they got their translation from was the Septuagint. So you're like, why is this worded a little different when it's quoting from the Old Testament? I go to my Old Testament, it's worded a little differently because they're quoting from the Septuagint. Interesting, right? Okay, so and this shows up in Hebrew in text. So the LXX, the Septuagint, is a great way, if anything, of validating the Masoretic text of the Old Testament. But again, perhaps the biggest of them all, of the Old Testament manuscripts, is what? The Dead Sea Scroll.
I thought I already did that.
You missed your cue. You missed your cue.
What is he trying to get at?
Now I'm sure by now, this is the area of the Dead Sea right here. These are the actual caves. Okay? By now you may have heard the story of the Dead Sea Scroll. It was a discovery in Qumran in 1947 by an Arab Bedouin shepherd boy. And I had to look up his name. His name is Muhammad Ad-Thahib. I'm not going to say that again. But he was looking for his lost goat. And his lost goat had wandered off into these caves about a mile west of the Dead Sea. Okay? And so in looking for his goat, he stumbled upon a cave and he found some clay earthen jars. This is what they look like.
He's a really good looker. Like, jars don't look anything like a goat.
So this is what he found. These clay earthen jars, and inside were all these scrolls. And from that initial discovery, historians and archaeologists have found many other caves with many other scrolls and different types of artifacts. Both biblical, now let me just say this again. Both biblical manuscripts and other non-biblical manuscripts were found here, okay? But the biblical manuscripts we did have, we had in the Dead Sea Scroll discoveries, you had partial copies of the complete Old Testament, and then you had complete copies of the Old Testament, okay? So this is an actual copy, this is an actual scroll from the Dead Sea Scroll, okay? This is actually one of them. Now, interestingly enough, and I don't want to get too far deep into this, but I'll give you maybe one theory. We have every book in the Old Testament found in the Dead Sea Scroll but one. Any of you guys heard this?
Yeah.
What's that one book we're missing?
Genesis.
No. It's Esther. Yeah. Now, there's lots of explanations for this. And again, who knows, they're still discovering stuff in these caves, in this area. So who knows, we may come across it. But one explanation,
70 years and
they're still finding things. One possible explanation is the Essene Jewish community that lived there, and this was their library. Okay, they existed from 300 BC to 50 AD. This was their library. This is where they housed it. Okay, this library of manuscripts. One explanation I think holds some weight. One possible way is the Qumran community. They were opposed to a book that describes a Jewish woman marrying a Gentile king and not following the Jewish laws because of their strict community law. Okay, so that's one. Again, we may find it later. They're still making discoveries in the area. And again, if you did searches, you guys probably, I think every so often, every few years, I'm at the grocery store and I see something about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Or I'm flipping through the channel, or I'm now on Amazon Prime, and it's like, oh, there's some new Dead Sea Scroll documentary. I mean, this is incredibly popular.
Could it be because it doesn't mention the name of God? That's the only one.
Yep. That's another possibility. Now, why is the Dead Sea Scrolls such a big deal? We're going to play a little game. Don't hate me for this. We're going to do a little activity to kind of maybe let this sink in. So, have you guys heard of the telephone game?
Yes.
Oh my God, I can't believe he's making us do this. So we're gonna do it, but I have a point in this. Okay, so let's get in a single line here and kind of like curve to, okay, everyone just get in a single line. No, standing. All right, everyone knows the rule of the telephone games. You have to whisper it in the ear of the person in front of you, where no one else can hear you. Okay? I know. Yeah, make the line curve. Come on, just pretend we're at some good restaurant. Okay, you gotta get in. Okay, here's the other thing. You cannot repeat it. You have one. Okay, you hear it once. You repeat it once.
Get in line, Caleb. What are you doing?
Okay.
What if there are 4 whispers?
Get in line.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the back of the line. We'll see what happens. And again, you can only whisper it where the other person... I'm going to pull you a little closer here, over here. Okay, ready? No, turn that way. Are you ready? Okay, guys, quiet. Shh. Alex, the Alice station. 8 to 11 eclairs in the evening with espresso, not Americano. Dude, come on. I'll do it for you. Alex, the Alice station. 8-11 eclairs in the evening with espresso, not Americano. Oh.
Whoa, Kate, look out.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, Kate. Can't repeat it. Don't look at him. He can't help you.
I like that idea.
Make some high chew noise. Chew louder.
No, you can't do that.
Game is traditionally silent.
You just destroyed this game.
No, somebody else did, bro. That was not a coherent sentence.
Go ahead. Do your best. Just do your best. Do your best.
We should start it down that way and have a meet and see what it's like.
That would be an interesting variation of the game, yeah.
I remember. This is so long.
I'm sorry.
No, did you make it a really long sentence or something?
I got some ideas. I didn't think it would be this hard.
This is great. This is the longest
Okay, go. All right, go faster. Just do your best.
We're like 5 people in. Hurry up.
Everyone gets 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's how I, play, two-hand touch football.
Dude, Blake was laughing through it. I didn't hear what he said.
You can't repeat it. Go ahead.
Blake, we're shooting.
I'm pretty sure we're down to one word that was
What?
Okay, everyone take your seats. Everyone take your seats. You stay up here. Stay up here.
Definitely not.
All right. Please tell us what you heard.
I like saying something, something,
No,
something.
it's like what I said. Oh, that's not what.
That's what I was told.
That's not what I
Somebody dropped the ball the first like 3 people.
Yeah. Alex said something about something.
What did you hear?
What did I hear? Alex the Owl Station 811.
Eight what?
Sinclair?
Sinclair's?
Is that what?
No. That's what you heard.
Yeah.
Here it is, everyone. Alex, the Alice Station, 811 Eclairs in the evening with an espresso, not an Americano. Hey. Okay, I have a point, and maybe I have a point. Okay, look. Think about it. 26 people?
Yeah.
26 people in a time span over 5 minutes with just 15 words. Now, let's take that and think about the Old Testament and the Dead Sea Scroll, okay? What happens when you have more than 26 people over a period of thousands of years to accurately communicate 419,687 words? This is why the Dead Sea Scrolls are a big deal. Because not only are the Dead Sea Scrolls dated thousands of years earlier than any Old Testament manuscripts we had up until this point, going way before the time of Christ, 168 BC, we have parts of the Dead Sea Scroll. They are virtually identical to the Old Testament Masoretic text. Do you get why this is a big deal? Think about that. Okay? So, for example, with just the Isaiah scroll, okay, that we found, compared to the oldest Masoretic text we thought we had, 95% exactly the same. 5%, what scientists can tell who study documents, the 5% we have that's different, okay, due to slips of the pen. And the reason they're slightly different is because over that long period of time, over 1,000 years, the way you spelt words changed. That's it. Wow. If you want to be accurate, 95, but virtually it's exactly the same. 419,000 words, thousands of period of time. That's why the Dead Sea Scrolls are a big, big deal.
And the fact that they didn't get destroyed.
Yes, God protected his words. So, 5%, like I said, slipped of the pens, variation. So over a period of 1,000 years, the Old Testament text remained. That's why when I said earlier, when you asked a Jewish scholar or scribe, and they said, if we just had one, I feel confident that's all we need. That's how meticulous they were, okay? So, that's incredible if you ask me. All to say, okay, when you think about the Bible, you hold in your hand, okay? Or you hold on your phone. I would say to you and argue that what we have here is a miracle. A miracle. People look for miracles all the time, guys. I mean, maybe even you. You ever get in this point of your life, you're like, I just need you to speak to me, show me something, make the clouds, do something. I need a miracle to know you're there, what you're saying to me. Everyone wants to experience a miracle, but I would say this is nothing short of a miracle. Seriously, guys. That's why we played that silly game. Because if we can't get 15 words right in 5 minutes with 26 people, because that's how human communication works. That's what happens. It breaks down. But all I'm saying is that's how meticulous they were. That's how well it was preserved. That's how careful God was. That's why I think this is a miracle. Okay? All right. Comments, questions? Yes?
I love how you use that because I literally just used that with the kids in Sunday school about God's word and how it doesn't change over time when we play telephone, and then we play telephone with a note with scripture written.
Oh, yeah?
And we just passed it down the line, and then it came out the same, and it was like,
Right.
this is the point of scripture. But I actually have a couple questions.
What's that?
I have a couple questions too.
Okay.
How do they know how old the manuscripts are?
Carbon reading, and then there's a science we're going to talk about in the next section called textual criticism, so I'll get into it then.
Okay,
Yep.
and then how old is considered to be an ancient manuscript since we're writing up to today?
How old?
Yeah.
Well, some of these manuscripts we have, some of them that are dated.
Like when is it not ancient and modern or
Ancient manuscripts, well, I guess I don't know if they would classify it that way, but again, manuscripts in itself would be considered anything that was handwritten or copied, any work of antiquity, something that happened, I would say probably 1,000 before the time of Christ and 1,000 years after is maybe a general rule of thumb where things are considered works of antiquity. Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was just wondering why in Daniel, why does it switch to Aramaic like halfway through? Because he says that the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, and then my footnote says it's in Aramaic for chapter 7.
Yeah, Aramaic was one of the languages used in the court, as part of the royal court, and so when you had royal decrees or official communication, they would often put it in Aramaic.
So what language would they have started in?
Well, you have a mixture of Aramaic and Hebrew in Daniel. Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense.
Okay. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I want a high chew. What's up with that? What is up with me not getting one?
Caleb.
Go ahead. Oh, all right. All right, guys, let's take about a 15-minute break, okay?